Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker and I'm joined by Ash Sarkar at AO Caesar. Not on Blue
You
Sky yet. Are you on
never
Blue,
read
are
out
you
my
on Blue
app.
Sky? I feel like people should follow
I'm
you on
not on
social
Blue
media.
Sky.
I'm gonna be generous, Ash, and promote your social media profile because I feel like you deserve a bigger platform and I'm here as an ally to support you.
To help me completely scramble my brains on Twitter. I think I'm going to go down with the ship. Do you know what I mean? Like if I've not quit the platform now, there's no level of brain rot that can make me do it. I'm just waiting for it to be fun again. I remember the heady days of David Cameron being accused of doing a reverse haram on a pig, and that was one of the greatest nights of my life. And I want that energy back.
It wouldn't happen on Blue Sky. Although, I mean, good on you if you're on Blue Sky. I just can't bother to learn about another platform. I don't really tweet anymore anyway. I feel like we talk so much about social media rotting all of our brains. I'm trying to look at my screen less. Of course, our show on YouTube does nothing but enrich your brains. Coming up tonight, chaos in the streets of LA as the National Guard is deployed. The Gaza Flotilla ship has been intercepted by the Israeli army. The threshold for winter fuel payments has risen, and New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani surges. Stay tuned for all of that. Now, before we start the show, we want to say a huge thank you to everyone who signed up to become a regular supporter in the past week. We asked for 1,000 of you to sign up and back our work, and we've been blown away by the response. Your support matters because we don't just want to grow our audience. We want to shift the public conversation and take on the vested interests that distort mainstream media. Did you know, this is a good fact, just 3 companies control 90% of the UK's newspaper circulation. That's up 20% in just 10 years. That's according to the Media Reform Coalition. So we're different. We're not owned by anyone. We're funded by you guys, and that's why we need your support to build a new media for a different politics. To become one of our 1,000 new monthly supporters, head over to novaramedia.com/support to sign up. We want to hear from you as well. Let us know what you're thinking in the comments. Tweet on the hashtag Novara Lives. Trump's political rise came through exploiting divisions in America's society, and what we've seen this weekend in Los Angeles is a fight that puts the president in exactly his comfort zone. Left-wing protesters facing off against law enforcement agents in a Democrat-controlled state, private property on fire, roads blocked, and all over the issue of illegal immigration. It's an image that could have been designed by Trump's campaign staff. And perhaps it was. Let's look at how we got here. So on Friday, ICE agents raided a number of businesses in LA, looking to arrest undocumented migrants. Now that sparked impromptu protests, and ABC News was on the scene.
Now, this is how it all started. There was earlier this morning, apparently a raid by ICE here at a business called Ambiance. Inside, the agents were there pretty much most of the morning. Then a crowd started forming outside the perimeter. They started actually surrounding these buildings. And I'm not sure if this is what happened, but obviously the people inside could not get out because all of these people had surrounded the building. Well, that's when these armored vehicles started coming in. All these agents started coming in, and they surrounded the building. They were using pepper spray and got all the people that were around the building, got them out of the way so that they could bring in vans into the parking lot of the building. Were able to get some people that were inside, some of the workers inside. They put them in those vans to take them out.
Now, that raid on a clothing manufacturer was one of many across LA on Friday. 44 people were arrested by ICE. ICE is, of course, the Federal Immigration Enforcement Agency. Now, that sparked a wave of peaceful protests in the city, including this one, attended by a reporter from MSNBC.
When you've got ICE showing up outside of places like schools, it quite literally is striking fear into the heart of people all throughout this community. And it is, I think it's fair to say, the worst fear of so many people here who live in Los Angeles and who have heard President Trump threaten that they would do this. But when this day comes on a Friday morning that stretches into a Friday afternoon, people in Los Angeles are mobilizing, and they are very upset. You have Cheerleader here, one of the big NGOs here that fights on behalf of immigrant rights. Everybody is out today because obviously this is not to be tolerated by these folks here on the streets of Los Angeles.
So earlier on Friday, you have sort of scuffles, and when people are trying to intervene in those ICE raids. Then in the evening, You get what looks like a sort of very large, somewhat mainstream, peaceful protest. Then on Saturday, the ICE raids continued with around 70 more people detained. And in the heavily Hispanic neighborhood of Paramount, there were more clashes.
A violent clash in Paramount. Protesters face to face with Border Patrol agents. One side hurling rocks and bottles, the other firing back with pepper spray and rubber bullets.
Now, at this point, de-escalation might have been possible if you had someone like Obama in the White House, for example. Perhaps he comes out and gives some kind of inspirational speech. That, of course, is not Trump's MO. He posted this on Saturday night. If Governor Gavin Newsom of California and Mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles can't do their jobs, which everyone knows they can't, then the federal government will step in and solve the problem. Riots and looters, the way it should be solved. And then, against the wishes of California's governor, he ordered officers from the National Guard to quell the protest. So sort of getting in the National Guard, which the president did, very, very unusual. The National Guard, of course, are state troops that can act in times of emergency. They're usually controlled by state governors, but Trump federalized control of them over the weekend so he could override Newsom, or Newscum, as he calls the governor of California. This is the first time a president has done so since Lyndon Johnson in 1965. So Lyndon Johnson was sending in the National Guard to protect civil rights protesters against a racist Jim Crow state. So sort of very different situation. This didn't end the unrest, though. Rioting did still continue into Sunday. And this is when we saw some of those images that news producers just love. This is a row of Waymos. So those are self-driving taxis that have been set on fire for some reason. I'm not quite sure what the connection was to sort of the issue at hand. This is an image that Trump could have designed himself. So you can see here a burning Waymo, and then you've got a masked man wearing, or masked, I mean, he might even have, it looks a bit like he's got a Hamas armband. I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, he's waving a giant Mexico flag next to that burning car. Elon Musk drew attention to a similar image of a topless man on top of a graffitied Waymo waving a Mexico flag. Now, as I said, this is a potent image, I think, not just for the media, but for MAGA. They can say Los Angeles is out of control. These are people that don't love America. This was, though, or was it just a situation that Trump has been able to exploit? Because the other option is that it was basically orchestrated, right? Could this have been something that the Trump administration intentionally provoked? Well, the BBC spoke to an eyewitness who gave us some clues.
We were at a stoplight on the other side of Paramount, right? Over there in Alondra. When out of nowhere, in the stop, immigration agents, ICE, all that came, they came dressed up in all their military gear, and they stopped traffic. When they stopped traffic, we started noticing, and I told my girl, that's immigration right there. What they started doing was they went in front of a business, a negocio, and they started raiding it. They started bringing people out in vans. Once they started doing that, that's when everybody knew, what was going on. And everybody was there in the traffic jam. Everybody, right? You're stuck in your car, in your vehicle. When they saw us looking at them doing all that, that's when they started throwing tear gas. Everybody was still in their vehicles. As soon as one of the tear gas,
you said who was behind you?
Behind us, there was a woman and her young daughter. She was around 13. I kept in touch with them, and as we speak, she's in the hospital because the tear gas bomb hit her right in the face. They were right behind us, taking notice that we're not there to protest. We were stuck at the light, right? But we're witnessing everything happening right in front of our eyes. The tear gas explodes. They come out crying out of their vehicle, and they can't breathe. They're literally on the ground, right? I have the video. I have the footage, right?
And so what do you and your girlfriend do at that point?
We get off, and we see everybody else getting off to record. Peacefully, we do not throw anything at them. We're not yelling at them. We're just recording what's going on because people deserve to know the truth. This is why you guys are here. This is because, these things need to be documented. This is what they wanted. They wanted people to riot. They wanted the people to start fireworks. They wanted the people to start burning out. Why? Because this is the effect. So they can make us look bad. So they can make us seem that we're the ones causing this, that we started it.
Ash, I want your thoughts on this. So that guy there, he wasn't a protester. He was someone who was in traffic when one of these ICE raids happens, sort of ends up having tear gas thrown sort of in his direction. He's saying that they, I suppose the ICE agents, sort of in his story, were looking for a fight. And you could see how this works in Trump's interests. Obviously, I think sending in the National Guard was obviously an overreaction. But if what you want to do is escalate the situation, then that's a perfect thing to do. What's your sort of interpretation of what we've seen over the past 3 days, I suppose?
I mean, the first thing is that I completely agree that this was effectively orchestrated by Trump. There are these longer term trends of the militarization of immigration enforcement and behaving in a way which is thuggish, violent, and perhaps even unlawful. And I think that this leads to a question which is really important, and this is something which people debate endlessly on social media: is do you think that violent unrest is justified? I think what ends up happening is that people take two separate things and they smush them together. And I think you've got to separate out the considerations. One is, are they morally justified? The other is, are they strategically justified? The first thing in terms of are they morally justified? Well, if you're in a situation where the government is deliberately bulldozing through every law and principle that's meant to constrain it, is behaving in a way which is violent, which is provocative. And we've seen these videos of the way in which immigration enforcement has been behaving, detaining, kidnapping, deporting people who have every right to be in the United States in some cases. There was an awful video of a Chilean tourist who was forcibly separated from her 12-year-old daughter. She was screaming for help. When you have these kinds of images in circulation, when you have this kind of attitude to immigration enforcement, I do think that a government, a state breaking the law, is far worse and much more corrosive and much more damaging than any individual breaking the law, because the government is meant to ensure, here are some rules, we all abide by them. If you abide by them, you've got nothing to fear. So when a government breaks the law, it completely undermines the function of law and order in a society. Ironically, it's a very right-wing phrase and framing, but that's what it does. The second consideration is it strategically justified? And I think that when you're having to take into account that this is something that Donald Trump wanted. When the BLM protests were going on, Trump apparently, this is according to sources who are close to him at the time, so, he was saying, send in the army, why can't we just shoot them, etc., etc. So I think he has long wanted this kind of standoff with left-wing or left-wing coded protesters. Law and order, those were three words that he repeated an awful lot during his campaign. What he means by that, it isn't a sense of here are rules that we are all constrained by. It's about the sort of muscular arm of the state crushing dissent and disorder. I think if you take back and you take a step back and you take a longer historical view, whether or not militant, violent responses harm or help a cause is a really, really, really complicated question. So on the one hand, when you look back at the rioting of the 1960s, particularly that which followed the assassination of Martin Luther King, it did lead to changes in policing. You had the very, very first massive commission, which was instructed to look into the causes of urban unrest in the north of America. And it identified issues like poverty, lack of opportunity, racist policing, so on and so forth. There were some reforms brought in. Similarly, after the 1992 LA riots, that did lead to some degree of reform. However, if you look at some of the other research that's done, and I think this was the notorious research which got David Shaw fired, just checking up on the name, Omar Wassow. So Omar Wassow, and I do hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, his research suggested that the rioting of the 1960s hardened white opinion, that it contributed to the push of white Americans towards law and order style rhetoric and contributed to the election of Richard Nixon. So I think in terms of this debate, which is raging on social media, do you condone, do you condemn, blah, 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 blah. When it comes to the morality, to be frank with you, I don't condemn. I don't condemn because what we've been seeing with immigration enforcement is them behaving in a manner which you could only describe as fascistic. When it comes to strategic condemnation, I just think it's really complicated, and it's a lot more complicated than either side wants to make out. Because you've got one side that says blanket condemnation of any departure from nonviolence. And then you've got another side, which is, I think, really kind of post-analytic as well, which sort of wheels out the Kwame Ture quote about how nonviolence is doomed from the start because the United States has no conscience. And it doesn't take into consideration, okay, well, this is something that Trump plainly wants and has thought about for a long time. So he's at least anticipated that the right and the forces of white nationalism stand to benefit from outbreaks of violent disorder in America's diverse cities. So that's one of my frustrations at the moment, Michael. Sorry for rabbiting on.
Very nuanced, very balanced. Boysdale, Waymo cars were burned because police request footage from their cameras. That's interesting. So I was sort of saying, what is the connection between these Waymo cars? I was wondering if it was sort of the beginning of a Butlerian jihad, and people were saying we don't want these autonomous cars to be taking our jobs, and then it was actually like taxi drivers who were burning them down. But maybe not. I also saw on Twitter that people were kind of calling the Waymo to a sort of riot district to then burn them down. I mean, when they were all on fire, it looked like it was. I think they sort of hang around in car parks until they get called. I don't know what your interpretation of that was. I mean, I suppose is when you see cars on fire and looting and stuff that Trump is licking his lips and he's saying this is exactly the kind of chaos and anarchy that means people will rally to me instead of Gavin Newsom.
The burning car is a hugely potent symbol of urban unrest. All right. We see it in France. We've seen it in London. Cars getting destroyed is a hallmark of urban unrest. And there is something kind of inventive about utilizing Waymo and the fact that it is this entirely automated system to be able to burn those cars and sort of create those images without burning somebody's car. I mean, these are cars which clearly belong to a corporation. I'd also think that the Butlerian jihad thing, I think, might be sort of in there, maybe unconsciously. But when it comes to rioting, there's immediate causes and there's proximate causes. So immediate causes for something like the 2011 London riots, which spread to the rest of England. The immediate cause was the unlawful police killing of Mark Duggan. Proximate causes included austerity, the perceived unfairness of the bailout of the banks, poverty, all of these other things. And what I remember from walking around London during that time is that when I was going down Walworth Road, which is in southeast London, all of the betting shops were smashed up. Lots of the other shops on Walworth Road were completely fine. It was the betting shops and the pawn shops which were smashed up. And so I think that that's an indication of proximate causes, right? This sort of anger at this parasitic, model of business which preys on the poor in southeast London. So not an immediate cause, but a proximate one. And that's a way to express it. And if you think about Waymo and what it might symbolize, automation, people being, chucked out of the labor market, gentrification, the sort of incursion of, Silicon Valley tech billionaires who are ruining everything and finding ways to profit only themselves. I can imagine that seeps in there. That would be a proximate cause, and therefore make Waymo, ironically, an immediate target.
And I suppose on the politics of immigration, so as far as I understand, Donald Trump has reduced crossings on the Mexico-US border by 93% sort of year on year, which from my following of American politics doesn't seem to be sort of any pushback from the Democrats on that at all. There seems to be a consensus among sort of mainstream politicians that this is a good thing. It is on mass deportations that sort of there is the contention, and I imagine the Democrats are trying to work out what their position is on this, because I think 10% of people in Los Angeles are undocumented. So that's a lot of people. A lot of people's school friends or neighbors, family members, and presumably that also makes sort of the economy of the city function. Where do you see this going? Because I think, again, Trump probably is relishing this fight, a fight over whether or not illegal migrants should be deported or not. Where do you see this going?
So my partner and housemate were recently on a 6-week road trip through the United States, and they're going through the South. And I don't want to do that thing of drawing massive conclusions based on a kind of secondhand reports of someone else's holiday. But what was interesting is that what both of them said, and also a friend who they were traveling with who is themselves from Missouri, is that the polarization between big city and smaller town, more rural areas was just huge. Just a massive divergence in political opinion, in cultural worldview, in terms of, the basic principles of what they think a good society is. And there's practically no overlap. And one of the things that was interesting is that they were like, well, when you're in the rural South, Fox News is playing everywhere, and there's actually a very high level of political engagement. So a lot of political media that's being consumed all the time. So you've got these, if you want to be really crude, these sort of like two cohorts of like, you've got progressives and liberals on one side, and you've got the Republicans and MAGA on the other, and they're occupying really geographically separated lives. And also there are these almost completely separate information universes being built around them. You can't think of a way in which this doesn't play to Trump's advantage with those groups of people. I think the things which could shift it a bit is that you've already got warnings from the likes of JP Morgan and their forecasters that such a sharp reduction in immigration overall could lead to the US's growth stalling. And then you've also got the fact that you've got so many big cities which basically rely on the labor of undocumented and irregular migrants. I think that undocumented immigration, we always seem to talk about it as, well, these are people who are breaching the rules. And I suppose in a very literal sense, that's true. But they're also absorbed by an economic system that needs these hyper-exploitable workers and uses these hyper-exploitable workers, and then also uses that same class of people as a scapegoat. And that's something which I find really disgusting. It's why I thought that something like the DREAM Act, which was introduced by Obama and regularized the status of irregular migrants, was morally the right thing to do, because you've worked these people to the bone. Often these are the exact kinds of workers who aren't protected by minimum wage legislation. Their conditions tend to be worse. Their housing tends to be worse. And they're the backbone of your agriculture. They're the backbone of, your low wage urban services. And a lot of the time, despite being, irregular migrants, very often they still do pay taxation. So you've got people who are paying into the system, but who are also relentlessly hounded by that very same system, who are relied upon to sort of power these urban economies, and are punished for it. And I think there's something there which morally I find really offensive.
The Gaza Flotilla ship Madleen, carrying activist Greta Thunberg as well as 11 other people, has been captured by the Israeli military. This is the moment Israeli soldiers boarded the ship in the early hours of this morning. Calm down. The UN Special Rapporteur for Palestine, Francesca Albanese, has been in constant communication with the ship's crew and was speaking with the captain when the ship was boarded. On Radio 4's Today programme, she described the build-up to its capture.
First, they were surrounded by Israeli speedboats, and this was the first time I heard them under stress. The second is when, after saying that everything was calm, they had not been intercepted, they were flown over by 2 quadcopters, so drones which can shoot, and then they were thrown at some substance, we don't know what was it, and they went undercover. And third is what it was, I was on the phone with them when the boat was intercepted and there were Israeli soldiers boarding the boat and taking them out. And this is when the communication with the captain was abruptly interrupted.
Albanese referred to a white substance being fired at the boat from quadcopters before the boarding. Now, it's not known exactly what that substance was, but one of the ship's crew members, this is activist Yasmin Akkar, posted this video after the drones attacked.
Okay, we are masking our face right now. We have quadcopters right above our heads, the most dangerous one, and they are, I don't know what this is. I'm so sorry. We don't see anyone coming. We don't know what this is, if this is paint or some chemical. No idea, but please sound the alarm.
So how did the Israeli attack on the ship unfold? Well, on Sunday afternoon, Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz issued this warning to the crew of the ship who were attempting to break Israel's 3-month-long siege on Gaza. So he said this: I have instructed the IDF to act to prevent the Madleen hate flotilla from reaching the shores of Gaza and to take whatever measures are necessary to that end. To the anti-Semitic Greta and her fellow Hamas propaganda spokespeople, I say clearly, you should turn back because you will not reach Gaza. Israel will act against any attempt to break the blockade or assist terrorist organizations at sea, in the air, and on land. At around 3 a.m. local time, Israel followed through on that threat. Having left Sicily on the 1st of June, the ship and its crew had traveled across the Mediterranean and were still around 180 kilometers away from Gaza when the assault took place. Now, that put the Madleen firmly in international waters, with human rights attorney and Freedom Flotilla organizer Huwaida Araf saying this: this seizure blatantly violates international law and defies the ICJ's binding orders requiring unimpeded humanitarian access to Gaza. These volunteers are not subject to Israeli jurisdiction and cannot be criminalized for delivering aid or challenging an illegal blockade. Their detention is arbitrary, unlawful, and must end immediately. After the Israeli military boarded the ship, soldiers ordered the crew to throw their phones into the sea, and communications with the Madleen were cut off. Obviously, the Israelis have nothing to hide. That's why they make you throw your phones into the sea when they illegally stop your ship, which is just trying to deliver aid to people that the Israelis are starving. The Freedom Flotilla, though, did release a number of pre-recorded messages from the crew, including this from Thunberg.
My name is Greta Thunberg and I am from Sweden. If you see this video, we have been intercepted and kidnapped in international waters by the Israeli occupational forces or forces that support Israel. I urge all my friends, family and comrades to put pressure on the Swedish government to release me and the others as soon as possible.
A few hours later, Israeli media released these images of the crew. So you can see Israeli soldiers there handing out bottles of bread and water to the volunteers who appeared to be refusing their supplies. At the same time, the Israeli Foreign Ministry released this statement. The selfie yacht of the celebrities is safely making its way to the shores of Israel. The passengers are expected to return to their home countries, while Greta and others attempting to stage a media provocation whose sole purpose was to gain publicity, and which included less than a single truckload of aid, blah, 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 blah. There are ways to deliver aid to the Gaza Strip. They do not involve Instagram selfies, and they say the tiny amount of aid that was on the yacht will be transferred to Gaza through real humanitarian channels. Now, it's sort of strange to say this was a media stunt. Yes, it was a media stunt. That's the whole point. The whole point is that these are activists who are saying you are wrong to be starving 2 million people in an act of collective punishment. Therefore, we are going to get media attention by actually taking some real personal risks, because we know that flotillas like this, volunteers on them have been killed, shot dead by the Israeli military. So they were taking real risks to get attention for a very, very important issue, which is the Israelis intentionally causing famine conditions for 2 million people, half of them kids. I mean, the Madleen is now on its way to the Israeli port of Ashdod, where Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz has ordered the military to show them the country's film about the 7th October attacks. The Israeli Foreign Ministry has also said that all 12 volunteers will be deported to their home countries. Now, the governments of those home countries have so far been pretty muted about the boarding of the Madleen. French Palestinian MEP Rima Hassan is one of those on board, but there has been no statement from the French government, nor have there been responses from the Brazilian, Dutch, or German governments, who also have citizens on board. The Madleen itself, it turns out, was also flying the UK shipping flag, meaning the British government has jurisdiction over it. That led UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese to post this. As the Madleen was reportedly intercepted and seized by Israeli forces in international water, the UK government must urgently seek full clarification and secure the immediate release of the vessel and its crew. The Madleen must be allowed to continue its lawful humanitarian mission to Gaza. And the British government, for its part, has not yet released an official statement, with a Downing Street spokesperson simply saying it wants Israel to resolve the situation, quote, safely, with restraint, in line with international humanitarian law. In contrast, international aid agencies have sounded the alarm over the ship's capture. Amnesty International have said this. By forcibly intercepting and blocking the Madleen, Israel has once again ignored its legal obligations towards civilians in the occupied Gaza Strip. The crew were unarmed activists and human rights defenders on a humanitarian mission. During its voyage over the past few days, the Madleen's mission emerged as a powerful symbol of solidarity with besieged, starved, and suffering Palestinians amid persistent international inaction. However, this very mission is also an indictment of the international community's failure to put an end to Israel's inhumane blockade. Activists would not have needed to risk their lives had Israel's allies translated their rhetoric into forceful action to allow aid into Gaza. States must act now or risk complicity in Israel's grave violations of Palestinians' rights. I think it's a bit late for saying they'll risk complicity, but I don't want to nitpick. I think that's generally a good statement from Amnesty International. Ash, what do you make of what we've seen? Obviously, as I said, sort of previous flotillas to Gaza have been met with much stronger force than this, which I suppose shows why Greta Thunberg was really very brave to take part in it. Because I think Israel is willing to get a lot of bad publicity, but they don't want to kill Greta Thunberg, presumably.
Well, look, I'm going to say something. I don't know how our audience is going to react, because obviously we're quite a left-wing channel. We've got quite a left-wing audience. But where are the conservatives? Where are the patriots? Because you've got a boat, a ship, which is flying a UK flag in international waters, which has been boarded by a foreign navy. You've had an unidentified substance. I saw one report in the Telegraph indicating there might be something called stink water, which is an irritant. It's really nasty stuff. And this vessel was not only behaving in a totally lawful manner, but it was actually carrying out its lawful duties to break what is recognized to be an illegal blockade, right? Where are the conservatives and the patriots? Because I absolutely guarantee you that if it had been, for instance, Somali pirates or Yemeni Houthis who had boarded and kidnapped the crew of a vessel that had been flying a British flag in international waters, the Telegraph would be demanding the involvement of the armed forces. The Royal Navy would be on its way. But there's something about Israel, something about how we facilitate an ongoing genocide, our decades, if not centuries long complicity in these acts of ethnic cleansing and violence, which mean, and that there are worse things that Israel does out in the world, but here's something which I'm talking about right now. It means that Israel kind of gets to, apologize for my language, cuck us. Just treat us like a bunch of cucks, right? So, British flag, international waters now, we're going to board your ship. When it comes to also having, killed British nationals who have done, Palestine solidarity work, in Gaza and in the West Bank, it turns out that Israel is allowed to do that too. And yet we provide them diplomatic cover. The US sends them billions and billions of dollars in international aid. We let Israel's advocates in this country dictate to our elected governments what it is British citizens can and can't say in their criticism of Israel. In the United States, you've got American police, universities, and immigration acting as an arm of the Israeli state when it comes to the detention of the likes of Mahmoud Khalil. And there is something about this which is, offensive to me as a left-winger. But if you're somebody who stands by the flag, who believes in this country, wants to stand up for the status of this country, why do you give Israel a free pass? You know, they're treating us like cucks, Michael, and I can't take it anymore.
Talking about giving Israel a free pass, let's look at some of Britain's worst media outlets and characters. So the Freedom Flotilla's Madleen, of course, didn't make it to Gaza before being attacked by Israel, but its crew, as we've said, took on grave personal risk to draw the world's eyes to the Israeli-imposed humanitarian crisis in the Strip, where Palestinians are literally starving to death. And of course, that's something the British media class despises. This is how LBC reacted to the capture of the ship by Israel. So using language which was straight from the Israeli government, it described the ship's mission as a selfie yacht stunt. The Sun parroted Israel too, describing the ship as a Freedom Flotilla stunt and hoping Thunberg would learn a lesson. And Piers Morgan said this: "Oh, shut up, Greta Thunberg, you attention-seeking narcissist. What an insult to the actual hostages in Gaza who really were kidnapped. This stupid stunt is all about your ego and will make zero difference to the plight of innocent Palestinians caught up in this dreadful war." Ash, you've got an ongoing relationship with Piers Morgan. How would you respond to that?
Oh, don't say it like that.
Come on, you're thick as thieves.
I mean, look, when it comes to Greta Thunberg, the reason why she is so hated by members of our media establishment is because they cannot stand people who live their beliefs and do so with integrity. And so that's why they're constantly trying to say she's a narcissist, she's shrieking, she's just doing this for attention, it's all a stunt. They try and get her on hypocrisy. They have to tear her down because her integrity is an inherent rebuke to their corruption and their venality. And you see it all the time. You know, you see it, for instance, with the way in which Owen Jones is treated by people who are supposed to be his colleagues. His vociferousness in what he believes in is treated as though it's some kind of war crime. You know, it's treated as the gravest of sins. And I think it's because, you know, in part, he holds up a mirror to our media culture. I mean, I saw a tweet from Benjamin Butterworth, who was a senior reporter at the iPaper. And he was scoffing, you know, something like, "Oh, I'm old enough to remember when the left didn't like it when, you know, white people dressed up in, you know, the ethnic garb and presented themselves as white saviors." And it was a picture of Greta Thunberg flying a Palestinian flag and wearing a keffiyeh. And I just thought, how fucking embarrassing for you. Because, you know, it's one thing to be part of the Israeli PR machine, which is why, you know, in a sick way, I've got more respect for the likes of, you know, Sipi Hotoveli or Elon Levy, because, you know, they believe what they believe and, you know, they're out doing it. You know, with the likes of Benjamin Butterworth or Piers Morgan, they're perhaps even unwitting participants in the Israeli PR machine because they're driven by their petty loathing of somebody who makes them feel, you know, morally judged in some way. And that's so much stupider somehow. You know, it's their egos that are affronted. And so they end up weighing in behind Israel and taking on Israel's talking points wholesale. I mean, the relevant information here, which, you know, you barely hear from these, you know, big, powerful media players, is that this was an unlawful boarding and detention, effectively a kidnapping. That the vessel was sailing under a UK registration, that it took place in international waters, and that Israel's blockade on Gaza is unlawful, and they have a history of killing those who have tried to peacefully break the blockade. Right? That is relevant information. And you know what? You can still have your, you know, veneer of oh, I believe in a two-state solution, and you know, there's bad on both sides. You can have your hollow politics if you want. I don't care. These are just facts, and these are facts that your audience is entitled to know. So every time you see a journalist or a media outlet concealing those facts, just know that it's not always because they're ideologically supportive of Israel, though that's often part of it. Sometimes it's just because they're too fucking stupid to look beyond their own petty media gripes. And so they can be led by the nose to weigh in behind Israel, which I think has somehow even less integrity than meaning to be part of the PR operation.
I mean, Piers Morgan calling anyone attention seeking is also pot calling kettle black, isn't it? As U-turns go, this is a biggie.
From this winter, 9 million pensioners will now receive winter fuel payments. It will be still means tested, but a higher level. We've listened to people's concerns around the level of the mean test, and because of changes we've made and the stability we've brought back to the economy, we are able to increase that amount.
The government has set the new threshold for receiving the winter fuel allowance at £35,000, much higher than the £12,000 it was set at in the original policy. The U-turn will cost the government £1.25 billion, all but wiping out the £1.5 billion saving they claimed their original means testing policy achieved. So they're net up £250 million for probably the biggest political mess up of the decade. Nigel Farage was quick to claim credit for Labour's change of heart. So he said on Twitter, Labour are in a state of blind panic. This U-turn on winter fuel would never have happened without Reform UK. Ash, some people sort of on Twitter mentioning how, 35k for pensioners is not low, in the extent that lots of people on a pension have a house bought outright. And obviously this sort of feeds into a narrative that young people get screwed over more vis-a-vis older people, because to have 35 grand after housing costs, if you're thinking of most older people having paid off their mortgage, you'd be richer. You'd be very high up in the income sort of spectrum. But I suppose it was inevitable they'd have to do this. Did they set the threshold in the right place? I don't know. What do you think of this?
Well, I think it's actually not really about the threshold or the technical detail of the policy. The problem is that they made this rod for their own backs, which was, we're going to be the fiscally responsible party. And so in order to really, connect with this messaging, we're going to do things that look hard-nosed and tough and like we're not afraid to take people on. And they did it with the dumbest possible group. Because look, when it comes to young people, by which I basically mean anyone who's, 35 and under, maybe even older, we've been getting screwed over for decades, and it hasn't been a decisive factor in many elections. Maybe it was part of the thing which got the Lib Dems kicked out of coalition in 2015, but obviously what that resulted in was nearly a decade of sole conservative governments. All right, so it's not like you had this sort of big left-wing surge because of it. You can basically screw over young people as much as you want because we tend to be concentrated in cities where votes stack up, whereas you've got this big geographic spread of pensioners and they also turn out to vote. So it was an incredibly stupid thing to do. And the messaging, I think, completely backfired, because I think what they wanted for Rachel Reeves was to be, the iron bean counter. And instead it came off a bit more Mr. Bean, chaotic, stupid, and now they've been forced into a humiliating retreat. The issue is not about where the threshold is. It's fundamentally about political momentum, because you've got 1,000,001 people who are able to claim, credit for this, right? You've got Nigel Farage. If you had a better organised parliamentary left, they could do it too. But, let's face it, Nigel Farage is the one who's riding high in the polls. Reform have got the wind behind them. And there are going to be all sorts of things where Labour are going to be forced into climb downs, U-turning on things that they'd ruled out. And I think that nationalisation of debt-laden and collapsing water companies is going to be one of them, where because Nigel Farage was a much more adept reader of where the political wind was blowing, and also he's got the benefit of not being in government, he staked out that position first. And so he's always going to be seen as the person who strong-armed labor into taking a position, and you're going to have, I think, a widening gap. So you're going to have Nigel Farage, who gets to be the person who's a man of action, a man of ideas, and you've got Labour, who are just absolutely falling behind. And I think that the fundamental core problem is still the same, which is Keir Starmer as a prime minister, as a figurehead for a political project, has no beliefs of his own. He's someone who is addicted to status. And so as long as he keeps getting to, huff the fumes of standing at a lectern, he's happy. You've got advisors around him who, for whatever reason, can't read the obvious, that there is a version of left-wing populism which could do very, very well with people who feel like they're not benefiting from this economy. And that is both reform voters and Green voters, by the way, if you have a look at some polling, which I believe Luke Trill from More in Common shared today. And then you've got this weird division of Labour where, Keir Starmer wants to be the guy who is, got his arm around Zelensky and is standing between the world leaders. And then you've got Rachel Reeves, who is setting the boundaries of domestic policy. We're going to see what happens with the spending review. But it sort of shows you where power lies on the home front, which is apparently you've got Yvette Cooper at the Home Office and even Sadiq Khan, who are very unhappy with the amount of money that they're getting for their respective remits. And you've got Rachel Reeves, who's the one who's in control. So if you've got a chancellor who is that powerful in setting domestic policy in areas which aren't just to do with the economy, so it has all these knock-on effects in the Home Office or the London Mayoralty or whatever, and she's that tin-eared to the mood of the country, there is going to be another version of this winter fuel allowance gaffe, right? There will be another one, I think. So I don't think that this U-turn is enough to turn it around. It might stem the hemorrhage a little bit, but I don't think it's going to stop the bleeding for good.
Yeah, wouldn't bet against that. Zohran Mamdani is a left-wing candidate for the mayor of New York City. He's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and he's currently campaigning to win the Democratic Party's nomination for the ballot. His main competition is disgraced former Mayor Andrew Cuomo, but Mamdani's pledge of a rent freeze, free bus travel and city-owned grocery stores, as well as an expansive grassroots door-knocking campaign, have seen him surge to second place. Mamdani has also executed an impressive social media push with ads like this.
If you're not Andrew Cuomo, keep scrolling. Andrew, I know you're bad with deadlines and moving to a new city is stressful, but there's an important election coming up and we're trying to fix the crisis you created. If you want to vote, you only have a week left to change your registration from Westchester to New York City. I know. You're shy. I assume that's why you've been hiding all campaign, but it's important to make your voice heard.
Now, all of that together makes Mamdani a threat to the status quo. Perhaps that's why during the lightning round of a debate last week, this happened.
Mr. Cuomo?
Given the hostility and the anti-Semitism that has been shown in New York, I would go to Israel.
Mr. Tilson, where would you go?
Yeah, I'd make my fourth trip to Israel, followed by my fifth trip to Ukraine, two of our greatest allies fighting on the front lines of the global war on terror.
Mr. Mamdani?
I would stay in New York City. My plans are to address New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs and focus on that.
Mr. Mamdani, can I just jump in? Would you visit Israel as mayor?
I will be doing, as the mayor, I'll be standing up for Jewish New Yorkers and I'll be meeting them wherever they are across the 5 boroughs, whether that's in their synagogues and temples or at their homes or at the subway platform, because ultimately we need to focus on delivering on their concerns.
And just yes or no, do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
I believe Israel has the right to exist.
Not as a Jewish state?
As a state with equal rights.
He won't say it has a right to exist as a Jewish state. Be very clear.
And his answer was no, he won't visit Israel.
I said that very
That's what he was trying to say.
No. Unlike you, I answer questions very directly.
All right,
and I want to be very clear. I believe every state should be a state of equal rights.
He's put that forward very well. You can see sort of Cuomo thinking that this is something he can attack Mamdani on. He wouldn't even visit Israel. Mamdani elaborated on his view of Israel in another interview last week.
Because I feel like you did not want to make a definitive statement on this. Do you support Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state?
I support Israel's right to exist as a state with equal rights. I believe that every
Why
state...
not as a Jewish state?
Because I'm not comfortable supporting any state that has a hierarchy of citizenship on the basis of religion or anything else. I think that in the way that we have in this country, equality should be enshrined in every country in the world. That's my belief.
Good communicator. Very well put. Difficult to argue with that. The stance on Israel has set some of New York's papers against Mamdani, though. The New York Post has run a piece claiming his anti-Israel stance disqualifies him from high office, as well as anyone who supports him. Now, that's a reference to New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who this weekend endorsed Mamdani as her choice for New York mayor. But it's not just the right who are coming for Mamdani. Some on the left are pretty unhappy with his line on Israel too. At a public debate last Friday, this happened.
No! But again, you share platitudes. You share platitudes about our people. You share platitudes about our martyrs. But not once do you actually side with the resistance. You side with our corpses, but not our resistance. You side with our corpses, but not our resistance. Our martyrs have cheated. Our martyrs have cheated.
Leave.
It's not okay.
Don't speak on behalf of Palestinians. I'm Palestinian, and
There's
I
many Palestinians that also
you're not
disagree with you.
Palestinians
There's many Palestinians that also
Leave right now. Stop with this event.
There's many Palestinians that disagree with that. We respect your organization. Our assessment of anything about the context is Not one thing.
Thank you. And I would first like to just continue to address the topic at hand today, which is about taking on corporate power. But I do appreciate hearing your thoughts.
It was really impressive, actually. I think that Palestinian activist, or I suppose I don't want to call her activist, Palestinian attendee, who was saying, "You don't really speak for me." Kind of a strange decision to stand up at a mayoral candidate who's very pro-Palestine, has spoken bravely and eloquently against Israel and sort of try and intervene and interrupt. People on social media weren't particularly impressed with that, I think. Ash, I want your thoughts on this candidacy. I mean, it would be, because on one level you want to say, why are they all saying they'll go to Israel in the mayoral debate? It should be about New York. I mean, at the same time, it would be really significant if the New York mayor was willing to talk about Israel and Palestine in the way that Mamdani is. Like that would be, I think, really, really significant.
Yeah, it would be hugely powerful. I mean, one of the things that we've seen both here in the UK, but particularly in the United States, is this shoehorning of Israel to try and make it a domestic political issue. And that's how, the right-wing media, the likes of the New York Post, like to frame it. That's the kind of work that the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and AIPAC, of course, a very powerful pro-Israel political funder, that's exactly the thing that they're trying to do. And I think that having a politician of principle, that doesn't necessarily mean you want or it's desirable for a politician to take, what others might call the maximalist position. So in that video that you just shared, where there was one person who was saying, why don't you side with the resistance? All you're sharing is platitudes. And then you had, someone else saying, look, you don't speak for all Palestinians. I mean, the thing is that the reality of, if a candidate sided with the armed resistance in a way which was, talking about actually existing militant groups as opposed to upholding, just the lawful right to resist an occupation, he'd be done. He would be completely toast. And the value of having, at the moment, a second place candidate, potentially a first place candidate if things go very, very well, who is a supporter of BDS, who has been a staunch critic of Israel and has also said, no, I don't believe in the principle of an ethno-state, which, I remember the Labour leadership of 2019, 2020 had Becky Long Bailey, I think, describing herself as a Zionist, if I recall correctly. That was our left-wing candidate. So he's already, I think, staking out space, which, doesn't ordinarily exist in politics, and that space perhaps wouldn't exist if he took the maximalist position. So I'm interested to see how this one goes. I mean, when is it that the Democrats decide their candidate, Michael? Could you tell me?
I think it's later this month. Can someone confirm? Stephen is... But it's this month, isn't it? Like 24th of June, thereabouts. I don't have the exact date. But yeah, we'll obviously give our audience updates on that. The actual election for the mayoralty is November the 4th, or whenever they always have their elections in the United States. What is it? June 24th. That will be interesting. We're going to wrap up a bit earlier because basically I couldn't be bothered to ask a follow-up question about Rachel Reeves. We're really ahead of time today. But we won't pad. It's been brilliant being joined by you this evening.
And all I wanted to do was talk about Rachel Reeves. I'm filled with the joys of spring whenever I think about her.
You were just desperate
she
for a
reminds
follow-up
me what
question.
it is to be alive.
You had more to say on Rachel Reeves.
More to say. Also, I came up with the phrase, the Iron Bean counter. Please donate to Novara Media for that kind of petty name calling.
Well, if you do want to hear more about Rachel Reeves, it is the spending review on Wednesday, so we will inevitably be talking about it. But don't not tune in for that reason, because we'll try and make it as interesting as possible. And to be honest, actually, that is very interesting because this is, how much each department is going to be funded for the next 3 years. So it's going to have some very significant real life impacts. We'll try and minimize the amount of time we have to listen to her very nasal voice. Ash, what did you want to come in and say?
I want to, if I can, just signpost a piece of Novara Media content, which I think people could be very interested in. So recently I interviewed journalist and author Ahmed Al-Nouk. He's Palestinian, he's from Gaza, and people may remember that in the early months of this genocidal war, Israeli airstrikes killed 21 members of his family. But the impact of Israel's war machine on his life and his family life actually extends a lot further back. So I think it was in 2020, his mother had cancer. Israel wouldn't let her leave the Gaza Strip for treatment, and she died. And in 2014, his brother Ayman was killed in Israeli airstrikes. Now, there's a section of this interview which is just so heartbreaking and also really fascinating because it's not a story that you hear in British media very often. Ayman was 9 years old when he witnessed his school friends being killed by a tank, by an Israeli tank, which had made an incursion into the Gaza Strip. And this was part of what made him choose a path that Ahmed and the rest of his family didn't, which is he became a militant. He became part of the armed resistance. The way in which Ahmed talks about that and humanizes that experience, I just thought was unlike anything else that I'd heard. And it's an hour and a half, it's a bit longer, but I think it's really valuable and really important because normally when we talk about what's happening in Gaza, of course, we talk about these sort of big picture things. It's almost at a level of remove because we're talking about a news event, we're talking about a policy, we're talking about reactions from politicians. This is something which is telling you, what is it like to be Palestinian? How does it feel in your heart, in your nervous system, in your body? So watch that. It's one of the pieces of work that I'm the most proud of participating in my entire time of working at Novara. And I really thank Ahmed Al-Nouk for his time and his candor.
He's a really brilliant guy, really brilliant conversation. Lots of people in the comments as well were sort of saying they've watched it and it really moved them. So do make sure you check that out. I assume we'll put a link in the description, will we? But that premiered yesterday. Let's wrap up then. You've taken us to 7 p.m. Ash. Thank you so much this evening. We'll see you very soon.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure everyone got their money's worth. Goodbye.
No, and that was very important you said that at the end. I do really recommend people go check that out, Ahmed Al-Nouk. We've spoken to him a few times since October the 7th. He's really been through a lot and really speaks in a very sort of passionate and moving way. Let's wrap up there. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.